The Kybalion is a study of the Hermetic philosophy of ancient Egypt and Greece, written by 3 initiates. The Kybalion contains the 7 Hermetic Principles, which I will cover in 7 videos. These secret doctrines, based upon world-old Hermetic teachings, help us to understand the nature of reality and the nature of self. It's important that us as light bringers understand these teachings, and not just those who would seek to control us. Hence, I give you my understanding of them. Greetings, my dears, in love and light. I'm Nikki Sutton, the Hermetic Principle of Polarity. Everything is dual. Everything has poles. Everything has its pair of opposites. Like and unlike are the same. Opposites are identical in nature, but different in degree. Extremes meet. All truths are but half-truths. All paradoxes may be reconciled. The Kybalion. So I'm going to tell you in this video how the principle of polarity is significant in your life and your perception of reality. It helps you to understand why things are the way they are. Also, an understanding of it helps you to understand the self and to work out how you feel and your emotions better and your effects on other people. The principle of polarity is a really good thing to know about. Okay, so taking part of that quote and breaking it down for you. Everything is dual, everything has poles, everything has its pair of opposites. Okay, so our reality has laws, there's parameters under which it functions, and the principle of polarity is one of those, and it's really useful to know about it. So opposites, you see, everything has its pair of opposites. You might wonder, really, does everything have an opposite? But if you think about it, there aren't really groups of 3s or 4s, it is opposites. So you might have masculine and feminine and all the traits under those that you can consider. So let's look at some more opposites. So you might have emotional or logical, emotional person or a very logical person. So these opposites aren't strict. I mean, there's no dictated opposite to being an emotional person, but still there's these poles, these degrees to which one is. Okay, so emotional, logical type person, intuitive or mathematical. You might say someone is very intuitive or they're more of a mathematical person. Internal or external, so that's a very obvious opposite or set of poles. Spontaneous or planning, so I might be a planner or I might be more spontaneous. Holistic or analytical, do I look at the whole or do I examine small parts? North and south, now that's a very obvious pole because you have magnetic poles as well. So the quote goes on, unlike are the same, opposites are identical in nature but different in degree, extremes meet. Okay, so what we're saying here is that opposites are really the same thing. If you think about it, these opposites, let's say happy and sad, they represent extremes of the same thing, which would be how you're feeling. Okay, so you might have intuitive and logical. So you think they're different things, but actually they're both describing a way of thinking. You might have to ignore or to respond. You might think they're 2 different things, but really they're describing the degree of attention paid. So how much attention I paid to something, do I ignore it or do I respond to it? Linear or circular. You might think they're 2 different things, but you could say that they describe how a line goes, what a line looks like. And you could have hot and cold, and you think, well, hot is different to cold, but really they're describing one thing, and that's temperature. So here we see that having poles is actually kind of an illusion. Everything we think about in reality is to do with these opposing poles, but really they combine to make one concept, and we can change our thinking in terms of thinking about things in terms of this one concept rather than in terms of these black and white opposing poles. Now, in addition, there's oftentimes a bit of a blurriness in the middle where these poles meet. So where would loud and quiet leave off? At what point on this scale Does loud stop and quiet begin? Or quiet stop and loud begin? What about sharp and dull? Let's say you've got a knife. At what point do we say the knife is sharp, and at what point do we say it's dull? It's kind of subjective. There's no defining point. And yet we often pigeonhole things. I might say this knife is sharp, but to whom is it sharp? To another person, it might be dull. Now, are you starting to see that when we label things in reality, that it kind of depends on people's opinions as to whether something is something or it's not? So, is my car going fast? To one person, no. To another person, yes, it's too fast. There's a blurry line as to, on the scale of fast and slow, what defines fast and what defines slow. The example of a thermometer is often given, that where does hot begin and cold leave off? There's no marking on the thermometer to say, oh, it's cold now. So I will get on to how these things apply to the self in a moment, but just quick, here we can see that things are not absolute. And therefore, when we judge things, judge people, judge circumstances, judge events, judge objects, that being judgmental is kind of a funny thing, because we are sort of clutching at straws, really. That when you have these decisions to make as to different poles, that the poles really, as they represent one concept each, that being judgmental can be a bit futile, really. And being aware of that fact can actually change your perception of reality and the self quite a bit. So it went on. All truths are but half-truths, all paradoxes may be reconciled. So if all paradoxes can be reconciled, we can't really speak in absolutes. All of these poles can be reconciled. All of these poles can be seen as the one concept that they represent. So we can't make assumptions. The extremes we speak of are merely descriptions of the degree to which the main concept applies. So all paradoxes can therefore be reconciled because of oneness. So as you see that these poles combine to create one concept, all concepts combine to create the all. So the Kybalion talks about the all quite a bit, and I always refer to this as creation, the one infinite being that we are part of. If you consider creation as being one infinite intelligent being divided into tiny little subparts that exist for learning and experiencing itself, we are part of this one infinite being, and so is everything around us, because it all consists of the same energy of atoms. Okay, so all of these combine, all of these concepts in this reality combine, and the ultimate truth is the all, creation, the one infinite being. And one main point of our existence is returning to that truth of oneness. So it's transcending those poles, recognizing that these great spectrums of opposites apply, and transcending that, seeing through it, and realizing the oneness of all creation, that we are all one infinite being, just experiencing itself in individual parts of individual points of consciousness. So we see past the poles and realise oneness, and that's what we need to realise on our ascension process. So how can the principle of polarity be applied to the self and others? Well, the law of one describes an individual as being service to self oriented or service to others oriented. So oftentimes we think about the self a lot, and we take actions in order to serve the self. But then other times we take actions in order to help others. So we might consider the actions that help others more in the direction of returning to oneness, because we are acting as if we are an indivisible whole, as if others are ourself. So there is no boundary between self and others, really, and that's how we might intend to behave if we are heading down a service to others type path as well as service to self. We need to look after the self too. So it also involves love for the self and love for others. Do I mostly love the self and others not much, or do I love myself and others too? So the law of one describes how if we are just a bit more than 50% service to others and the rest service to self, a nice balance there, then we're making our ascension nicely, our consciousness is raising. So one might imply that we might need to depolarize, therefore. So not polarize, say, for example, too much towards the negative. So personally, I do choose a pole, really. So while thinking about polarization, it doesn't mean that you can't choose a pole. So for example, I'd choose not to be a horrible person, and I'd choose to be more of a nice person. So I'd naturally just be a nice person anyway. So I'm swinging towards that pole, you see, on the spectrum. The degree to which I'm a nice or helpful person, I sort of swing towards that. So it's fine to choose a pole. We do all balance differently. We are all unique. And although I choose a pole in that regard, I am fully aware of it. And I am aware of the oneness, and I choose that pole in order to return back to oneness. So through a knowledge of the principle of polarity, we can be more aware of our emotions. Are we swinging towards very happy or sad, or helpful or unhelpful, or angry or happy, whatever's the opposite of angry? So it helps us to see the truth better, be more aware of ourselves and aware of others. And awareness of being. What am I? Am I being a pole? And if so, is that the pole I want? You know, these extremes. And also it enables us to change our vibration. And please see my video on the Hermetic Principle of vibration, because it says in that video how our vibration actually affects others around us energetically. So the principle of polarity helps us to be aware of our vibration. And here's a quote from the Kybalion: "It is possible to change the vibration of hate to the vibration of love in one's own mind and in the minds of others." So being aware of the principle of polarity allows you to alter your vibrations, being aware of these poles, and it therefore affects others. So we see that the principle of polarity does apply to our ascension. It increases our awareness of self in order to balance our emotions and our thoughts better, and it helps us to help others. And the principle of polarity helps us to understand our reality and the definitions we put on it and the perceptions of it, and also how kind of judgmental we are being, or others are being too. And by recognizing these things, we bring them into the conscious mind and we can balance them and mull them over, contemplate them, meditate on them. And it allows us, by shining the light of conscious awareness on it, it allows us to make our ascension in understanding and love and light. So I hope that's been helpful to you today in understanding the principle of polarity, one of the 7 Hermetic Principles. Please leave me and others a comment what you think about that. What kind of poles have you been recognizing or experiencing, and even transcending them? Support this Spiritual Awakening YouTube channel on Patreon and receive weekly bonus videos. You can also choose to receive spiritual guidance via email or spiritual sessions. And remember to click subscribe if you're not already a subscriber to receive regular spiritual inspiration on your journey through life. Like and share also, because we're raising the mass vibration together. So go now in love and peace.